Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are discussing national political news of the day, and well, we are full on into the presidential race. Labor Day is kind of considered the day that the campaigns officially start. Although these days they start like the day after the last election. But in any case, our first topic is to talk about the role of unions. There have been some interesting studies that show that unions are at their most favorable since the 1960s in terms of institutions trust by Americans. And I mean, every other institution, even small businesses, have gone down in the opinions of a lot of people in terms of their trustworthiness, whatever that means, by the way. But unions are really popular because they have been successful over the past couple of years. They used the labor shortage to their advantage to get some really good contracts. Might even be a factor in inflation, but that's another topic. And as usual, the vast majority of unions that are endorsing, not every union endorses, are endorsing Kamala Harris, including the United Auto Workers Union and other unions. And both she and her running mate, Tim Walz, who is actually the first vice presidential candidate to be nominated by a party who actually is a member of a union, the teachers union, of course. I believe it's the AFT. There's two national teachers unions, and the NEA and the AFT, and I believe AFT represents most people in Minnesota. But anyway, and Labor Day, they both the unions, of course, are really important to factor in the blue wall, something that Hillary Clinton did not really exploit enough in 2016. And it probably cost her the Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and almost cost her Minnesota. Joe Biden did much better in 2020. And on Labor Day, Walz and Harris were in the Rust Belt, speaking to union members. And part of her stump speech is that even non-union members should thank unions for higher wages. And she gets a lot of cheers for that. And so are unions going to play a big role in this election? Now, there are some unions endorsing Donald Trump. They are police unions. It doesn't appear that the Fraternal Order of Police is endorsing her yet. However, some state organizations are, and I'll name them a little bit later. But and this is a change over the past couple of decades that police unions will endorse Republicans. In 1984, the only union that endorsed Reagan over Mondale was the Teamsters. And back then it was kind of a reactionary union. It's gone through a number of internal fights and reforms since then. But currently, they're still holding out. The president of the Teamsters spoke at the Republican convention, did not speak at the Democratic convention. So a lot to talk about here. Dave, what do you got?
Well, thank you for that big picture, high-level overview. I'm just going to add to that a little bit that, nationwide, approximately 11% of workers in the private sector, or overall, rather, only 11% overall, and only 6% in the private sector are unionized. So if we were only talking about union members being part of the constituency for the Democratic Party, holding that group together versus maybe some like you alluded to, maybe like the police unions or some others might not stick with the traditional support for the Democratic Party. It's really a bigger picture than that. It's actually that what you said is that support has not been higher for unions nationwide since the 60s. And really, they were at their heyday in the 40s and 50s, and that's when about 1 in 3 workers in America were part of a union. So really, what are we talking about? I think we're talking about two things. That popularity of unions is a reflection of Biden policies, Biden White House policies that Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, would hope to parlay. Basically, like, for example, Biden is considered the first president that ever walked a picket line, and also the National Labor Relations Board. There's been policy changes and board composition shift that resulted in rulings that are considered pro-worker unions, but it's pro-worker rulings. But it's not just those rulings; it's actually the ripple effect, the exposure. So people are seeing successful union actions, like the vote for the Volkswagen Group, or Starbucks voting, or people are seeing the exposure for like union busting or union blocking activities and having an opinion about that. Also, like when the rail workers were lobbying for more safety and safe staffing levels, their union had a strong voice trying to protect the workers and the safety of transit. But then there was that big accident in Palestine, Ohio. So it's really been front and center in the public. So there's that one piece of it. But also, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the massive amount of effort, organizing effort, that unions have committed to this time around. And when we're talking about just one union alone, SEIU has talked about spending $200 million this election cycle. They're going after persuadable voters in battleground states. They're going after working class folks, multiracial folks. Like, the diversity of their composition really hits the target audience of the Harris campaign, because what we're talking about is these persuadable voters, in many cases in these battleground states, are in the areas around the urban areas, not the urban areas themselves. So it's, like I said, I think there's two lanes here. One is it's a really close election, and people are trending towards being conscious about living standards, quality of life, affordability, work-life balance. It's really post-COVID that's been front and center for folks. But then also, more importantly, like I said, that get out the drive efforts that the unions are funding, and they have the experience and the manpower on the ground to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge deal, and again, it's something the trade union movement was not enamored with the trade deals that Hillary Clinton's husband had made while he was president. And so a lot of times what happens is, even though the leadership or even the membership vote to endorse a particular candidate, not everybody in the union does. And so that's something Democrats have to really be conscious about. And Hillary Clinton made, like, in the last, after Labor Day, maybe went to the Rust Belt like twice the whole time and didn't speak in front of unions. She just didn't think it was that important. Now, again, unions have become very successful in strikes. As you mentioned, Joe Biden marched in one first time ever. And so they are a source of resources for getting the vote out, and the rest getting information out. But it's also their rallies that the unions support are just have a euphoria. I think that she and Tim Walz have been to like somewhere between 10 and 15 union meetings since then. They are putting them at the forefront of their campaign. I did check on the police unions endorsing Trump. The Florida Police Benevolent Association is in there, and as well as the International Police and the National Association of Police organization. The Fraternal Order of Police haven't yet endorsed him. Maybe they will. But in 2020, there were about 7 or 8 of those types of unions, prison guard unions and the rest, who endorsed him. I am wondering if the criminal convictions are putting a damper on that this time around. I do know there was a famous sheriff in Southern California, kind of a reactionary guy, who said, "I'm switching sides. I'm voting for the convict this time around," right? And so it's So there is a little bit of that, but maybe there are police associations out there that are maybe want to preserve their image with the public a little bit because of this, and because he's calling into question the whole criminal justice system without saying why or who's corrupt or what, and maybe they're a little more cautious this time around. Any thoughts on that?
So I'll say it two different ways. One is, yeah, I think there may be something to that in, like, the January 6th incident where there were police officers that were harmed, but
Yeah.
they, by the protesters and people who stormed the Capitol, and it just kind of got glossed over, I think, for the most part by Trump himself, or the narrative surrounding his candidacy seems
He's
to
certainly not going
look
to get the
past it.
Washington, D.C. chapter of any police union.
Right, right.
That's for sure.
And to agree with what you said about, say, the Justice Department or the FBI, there's a new book out, basically equating a Trump presidency to tyranny, and how the Justice Department and the FBI are, in effect, stuck in the middle, trying to be, good faith actors enforcing the law without appearing to have any kind of political role whatsoever. But the reality is that some of those people are Republican, and some of them are Democratic and leaning anyway, sympathetic. And so, like, the author, I remiss, I don't remember his name, but I saw him recently speak, and what he was alluding to is that, like, when you were going to make the decision to storm Mar-a-Lago to enforce a warrant to look for documents, there were some people that sort of said, well, we'd rather not do that, because maybe it might look bad. It might look like we're getting involved in politics. But then the other part of the FBI team was saying, well, we kind of have, or DOJ, combined team task force. They're saying, well, we have to do that. We have to uphold the rule of law. So I think there's a tension there. There's that piece of it. But then also, it might just be something just as simple, take it one step further, not just police or policing, but even Sean O'Brien, the president of Teamsters Union, he was asked recently why they have not yet made an endorsement when 9 out of the 10 of the top 10 largest unions have already endorsed Harris Wallace. He just said, look, everybody needs an interview before they get hired for the job, and we have an invitation out there for Harris to come speak with us, but until that happens, we're not going to endorse. And it's not really late for us to endorse. We usually endorse after the conventions, and maybe it's time, yeah, but it's okay that we haven't done it yet. And people had commented on that, said, well, about half of the members are Democratic leaning, the other half are Republican leaning, so it's a little harder for the Teamsters to do this.
Yeah.
So maybe with the police and other unions, that, like, I saw Trump's Vice President Vance go speak to he got booed at firefighter union. So maybe they're trying to reach out to typically sympathetic audiences, and they're getting some negative feedback, and maybe that dynamic's in play too.
And maybe that's why they didn't show up to any rallies on Labor Day. Maybe after Vance got booed, the Trump administration just didn't want to take any chances with it, even with police unions. I mean, the unions and the left have had a very difficult relationship. Unions were always part of the old left. McCarthyism was about trying to get communists out of the trade unions so that they would be more conservative than they were. And they did take a conservative turn in the 1950s, such that in the 1960s, the new left regarded them as part of, of course, we're talking about young people who are on universities mostly, but they regarded the unions as part of the old order. Phil Oakes, in his song, I Ain't Marching Anymore, it talks about, and you'll hear unions holler when they close a missile plant, right? And environmentalism. My communist grandfather told my new left father one time, ecology is a bourgeois science. It takes away jobs. It's a quality of life issue. So even within the old versus new left, there were these tensions. Then in the 1970s, unions were on the decline as success generations of the middle class just didn't understand their necessity. And and by the time they got in the 1980s, during the Reagan era, there were these law firms that specialized in busting unions, trying to find ways to do it by using bankruptcy to get out of union contracts for the airlines, for instance, and the rest. So there is a history here. And then I think once that boomer generation kind of took over the Democratic Party, you had people like Clinton in there that maybe didn't have the same view of unions. And I think that's the mistake that the Democrats have made. Yes, it's a tough alliance. They are socially conservative. They tend to be. Most union members, as my dad remembered, being in the carpenters union, he says, "Oh, those, a-holes would they hated Nixon, but only because it affected their wallet. Otherwise, they would have loved him, right?" It was just, we don't have time to go into this, but there are cultural divides there that maybe the Democrats are finally learning how to bridge. And we only got about a minute left. I'm going to let you close out on this, but maybe we'll talk about this again.
Yeah, I think you and I definitely should pick this up. And I know we probably have way less than a minute, so I'll just keep it to a sentence or two. That I think that Harris' team realizes in naming Walz as the vice president that it's essential for them to reach out across party lines, address the real needs of workers and the working class, and relating to the values that unions represent, and then that's translatable and transferable across all these red counties. The vast majority of counties in America are red counties, just at least majority red counties, and so these kitchen table issues, that being fluent and authentic in those spaces is what can make the difference. And they have actual policies they could point to, and a track record they could point to, and a vision they could point to. So there is the potential for success there.
The goals are the same for all Americans.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
There you go again.
And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
Okay, the much anticipated Harris-Trump debate, assuming it happens, and it looks like it's going to happen, is going to be hosted by ABC. It looks like I haven't checked the updates on it as to whether or not they have settled whether or not the mics are going to be open, but a very interesting twist in things. Trump always wanted the mics to be open, but Biden, I think in an error, had them closed, because I think if Trump had been interrupting Biden, maybe he wouldn't have looked as bad, kind of like what happened in 2020. But since then, Harris wants them open. She wants to take Trump on directly and said, we ought to have an open back-to-back exchange. Trump's people were resisting it for the longest time. But it appears there are going to be open mics. They're going to stay open. And this leads to possible direct exchanges. Maybe we'll see another, Harris versus Pence, I'm speaking right now moment, where she does that. But even more so, I think she is taking a real interesting attitude about an approach to Trump. In the interview that she did last week, only anticipated because the Trump people had made such a big deal about how she wasn't doing interviews. She was asked about Trump saying, questioning whether she was black, and her response was, "Same old tired playbook. Next question, please." Just that's it, and then just kind of laughed. it seems like she's going to try to needle Trump to get him to act up. But even if he doesn't, if he stays disciplined, then she's got a command of the issues and a command of the narrative. The open mic, and according to our producer, it is going to be open mic, probably because Trump didn't want to look like a coward. I don't know what the dynamics were in that discussion. But we are anticipating this debate. So far, no other debates have been scheduled, certainly not a vice presidential debate, which is what everybody wants to see. But this debate is coming up. It may be the only one. I guarantee if Trump had been ahead in the polls, he would not be showing up. Why would he? But he is going to show up, and they are prepping. I've heard that although Trump doesn't usually prep for debates, there are reports that he's actually trying to prep for this one. We'll see how that plays out. But anyway, what do you think is going to happen at the debates? This is our pre-game show, listening hopefully by the tailgate parties. What is going to be in the playbook?
This is the first time they've ever faced off in public, so there's a lot. Right. So there's a lot at stake here, and I think that there's that prosecutorial style, the intellect, the mastery of the details of governance versus the bull in the china shop approach of former President Trump. I think that to say it as overtly as I can, the key problem here for Trump is that Harris somehow has managed to have a net positive approval rating. She has springboarded those positive vibes into a net favorable, whereas he, as he has been for a very long time, has a huge upside down negative. So from his perspective, he really needs to knock her down a peg and be on the attack personally. I heard him in an interview, I think it was in the last 48 hours, Lex Friedman, that he was saying, hey, they're going to call me an authoritarian, then I am going to call her a communist, right? So that's their flavor of the week. We'll see how that sticks. But they're just the radical socialist approach to saying anything that they've touched or anything that they project towards the future is going to damage the country. And on the flip side of that is Harris knows that the immigration and affordability are the two key things that Trump is hammering home on the policy side. And that's been moving in the favor of Harris, actually, because the immigration in particular, and the economy too. So the fact we could talk more about the specifics of the the substance of the issues at hand, but they are really, my expectation is that they're going to go toe to toe about solutions, effectiveness of solutions versus the fear mongering and the hyperbole. And if I was in her camp, I would be really sharpening those arrows, making sure that anytime we're commenting that they're hitting home and striking lethally, which I think flip side of that, which is why Trump's got Tulsi Gabbard in his corner, helping him train, because she has proven that she's effective at launching criticisms at Harris and her record, and that's kind of her claim to fame. We could talk more about some of the other kind of broad strokes, but I think even Harris's advice that she's, even the unsolicited advice that she's getting is to pivot away from the way things have been under Biden and pivot towards a vision of the future, and just stick with that, because she's new and he's old, and that might be enough. Being the change candidate might just be enough.
We should point out now, actually, things have changed in the past 2 hours. It appears that Harris campaign agreed to muted microphones. I don't know why or how, but maybe she's figuring that that's actually in her favor. Who knows? There may be a reason for it, or maybe she just wanted to make sure that the debate happens. I don't know why, because she's ahead in every poll, but even out of the statistical margin in some polls. Whatever. That's what she has decided to do. So it will be a calm. Well, who knows if it will be a calm discussion? We don't know. But what she has to watch is that she has had problems during interviews before of getting flustered and defensive. Like when she was asked, "Are you going to go to the border?" in one interview, and she said, "Well, I haven't been to the border. I haven't been to Europe either." That kind of a thing. It did not play out well for her. She appears to be much more disciplined, even though she had Tim Walz with her for that interview last week. And of course, the critics in both the media and the Trump administration were, livid about that. One media person referred to him as a comfort animal for her, but he didn't actually participate much in the debate. And he didn't interrupt. She didn't get, flustered. That she seems to be very disciplined, but also if you watch her speeches, she's evolved just in the month that she's been in there. She is now ad-libbing, going off script and doing it well. When she's heckled, she handles it well. Maybe not as well as Obama, but nobody handles it that well.
Yeah.
And so I think in this, if she stays focused on the issues, that's where she wins. Because she obviously has a much superior policy knowledge than he does, because she reads the briefs, and as a prosecutor, she's probably going to be disciplined and prepared for that. So will this be a game changer? Debates rarely are. Every once in a while they are, but it's usually because somebody messes up more than that. Biden won the last debate with one line, "Will you shut up, man?" And then later, "I can't get a word in with this clown." That's how he won the debate. But she doesn't need to win the debate. She just needs to present as competent as the statesperson. And so maybe the muted microphones will allow her to focus on that, since she's actually, as you mentioned, her approval is much better. That's what she needs to focus on. She needs to focus on, of course, they never get into details about policy beyond what they want to, but she needs to do like Obama used to do, and actually Hillary Clinton used to do, is to look like you're talking about policy details when you're really not. It works. But she may even have a few. She actually, everybody, for all this line that she doesn't have, her policies out, she actually has some detailed policies that she's laying out, and people are starting to question them because they aren't identical to Biden's. And it's kind of interesting. Does this mean a change in policy? She won't answer that directly. She just says, these are what we are moving forward. There was the Biden presidency, and then there's going to be mine, and my policies are the natural progression, and doing quite well with it. So he's got to not lose his cool, because it'll look even worse if he's grimacing, silently. And he may be able to do that. He did stay disciplined in the third debate with Hillary Clinton, which I would consider close to a draw. She creamed him in the first two, and the polls were going her way until the Comey event. But debates make a big difference? Well, in a close election, anything makes a difference. And so far, it is a close election. Reagan won it in both Mondale and Carter had big moments in his debates. George Bush Sr. looked at his watch, right? That type of a thing. So it just, he blew it. Obama was just, blew McCain. And although Obama had a bad first debate, the second two debates against against Romney went very well for him. And one of them went really well when he got a little accidental help from Candy, I'm forgetting her last name, who actually fact-checked Romney right there. But at any rate, what do you think are going to be the important things to watch, and in terms of substance, if any?
So I think that, generally speaking, what Harris is going to try to do is make it clear that Trump's behavior and fitness for office is at center stage. So that actually the muted microphone is like we got the headline, but then it's been retracted. Dewey wins kind of thing. But so yeah, so the fact that it'll prevent him from being his own worst enemy, but to a certain extent, that's going to be better for the substance, for anybody who's interested about substance, for the benefit of the listeners to kind of be able to think for themselves, assess, and critical thinking matters. And so any given issue, like for example, one of the themes that I know that the Harris team is probably going to be focusing on, because people respond to it, is vanishing rights, the expectation that women's right to choose and LGBTQ rights, that these are things that people have come to expect in in our democracy that is as diverse and huge country that we have, lots of different ways to live, lots of different choices people are allowed to make. You can have certain opinions like Vance does, but they're going to come across as not really being in the mainstream. So I think Trump's got to walk this tightrope of making sure he throws enough red meat to the base, but he really will be kind of talked around to a certain point, and then she'll be able to take the jabs where she can. And if you look at it from the other perspective, Trump's his negative ads that he's able to run, and the the retweets that he does, or retruths that he posts out there, he's even said that he doesn't really he doesn't read them. He doesn't know for sure like who sent them or what that affiliations are. And he's like, well, he's said, he's like, that's working very well for me. He said, like, it's working well for me to throw out me to the to the base and just keep doing the team building exercises that he does, the panic and fear type stuff. But also, when it comes to something pretty heavy that I think she's going to start talking about too, is this Project 2025. Maybe she's not going to call it out by name, but she's going to say, like, this is a radical change of what the expectation is for how we run the executive branch of the government. And it's going to affect every policy and every aspect of life. And he's going to say, well, I never read it. And she's going to say, well, it turns out that the people that are running these courses for the transition teams that are forming right now, these are people from your last administration who are behaving as if they have the expectation that they're going to be on your next team, also your transition team. So there's that piece of it where she can kind of lead casually. And I just want to point to one thing that you said earlier. She's a transformed candidate. I don't think I know anybody who was an enthusiastic supporter 2-3 months ago, or would even try to defend her as a statesman, statesperson, or in the way that she carries herself. Because that's one thing, people were very critical of Hillary Clinton on a lot of things, but no one doubted her mastery of policy and as a diplomat, right? So I think if Harris is able to just keep from any major gaffes, and you could say that that she'll consider it a success. And I think I heard it said that pivoting away from democracy is at stake as the only thing you're talking about, and saying like actually freedom is at stake and the American way of life is at stake. I think that's important. And for Trump, I'll just say this one last thing. For Trump's perspective, there is a viable criticism out there like, hey, why are we hearing about all these great ideas when you all had 4 years? When we were talking about how the border was a major problem for our country, you all didn't do anything substantial, and now you're just paying lip service to get elected. What else are you just promising that you can't deliver? So there's a lot of he's going to be heavily negative, but it could land with his target audience.
He would, but he's got to expand his audience. He's got to expand his base. That's the problem that he's facing, why Republicans are so frustrated right now. He could be hit if he says, oh, I don't know anything about the Heritage Foundation or what. I mean, she could actually crack a joke about it. She could say the few people from your former administration who actually support you are involved, right? It would, because the vast majority of them aren't endorsing him. It's something she needs to bring up. But But real quickly, I want to point this out, and sort of the elephant in the room. She needs to sell, particularly to older America, that a woman named Kamala Harris, who is Black and Indian, can represent the country. And unfortunately, that's the truth. Sexism, racism, xenophobia, she's got to present in a unique way. That is a tough thing. Probably, who knows if the polls would even be better right now if she wasn't facing those challenges. And we'll talk more about that in the future.
Well, Whit, it shows that this race is very steady. Vice President Harris had a bump after she became the nominee, but the numbers are almost unchanged from before the convention. There you see them, 52% for Harris, 46% for Trump. Now, keep in mind, that is just barely outside the margin of error, Whit. And as you well remember, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won the national vote but lost the White House. So that really shows you a race that is very close to statistically tied. In the battleground states, if you look at the 7 states that will really determine who gets elected, you look at there, you see Harris has a slight lead in 6 of the 7 states. But I say slight lead in virtually all of those. It is statistically tied within the margin of error. So again, this race is about as close as it can be.
Okay, so we all know what the official swing states are. I say official. There's no official one, but we know that we've got the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and potentially Minnesota, but that doesn't seem to be playing out. And in fact, the strange thing is she's taking a bigger lead in Wisconsin than Pennsylvania or Michigan, which surprises me in some of the polls. And then the other are the Sun Belt states, Nevada, Arizona, and southern Sun Belt states, Georgia and North Carolina. I don't know if I'm missing any, but I think those are the 7 primary swing states that we're discussing, and those are where votes have to be won or lost, where the election is going to be won or lost. There are chances, again, that Trump wanted to expand it to Minnesota, possibly New Hampshire, and to be sure, Kamala Harris appeared in New Hampshire. They're not taking that for granted. That has been, of all the New England states, it is the most conservative, or at least the least liberal. And it actually, George Bush took it in 2000, which had he not taken it, he would not have won the election against Gore, no matter what happened in Florida. So, but the Democrats are now talking about wondering if they can open up in some other states into swing states. And there's some very interesting polling and some very interesting analysis. We've talked a lot of times on the show about the Dobbs effect. 2016 and to a lesser degree 2020, there were a lot of people who did not fit into anybody's likely voter formulas. And so Trump outperformed the polls in both of those elections. Maybe he'll do so again in this election if they haven't updated the likely vote. But usually likely voters are based on past performance, recently past voting performance of certain groups. But what we've been discussing on this show is the Dobbs effect. Since the Dobbs decision went down, overturning Roe v. Wade, Democrats have outperformed the polls in the actual elections, in every special election, and even in the main elections like 2022, probably about 90% of the time, sometimes by as much as 5%. So the question is will the Dobbs effect be sort of a counter? Are the polls not as close as they seem to be? Democrats don't want to depend on the Dobbs effect or anything. They're not going to be sitting tight, but if there is a Dobbs effect that makes a difference of 3 to 5 percentage points, then what does that mean for these polls in Florida right now? And in Texas, not quite as close, in Ohio, nowhere near as close, but all within single digit. Ohio used to be a swing state, but it hasn't been in a long time, not since Obama, I believe. First election of Obama, I think. I don't know about the second, but these are considered not necessarily safe Republican seats, but certainly strongly leaning Republican seats. Texas keeps breaking Democrats' heart. They tease that maybe they'll give let a Democrat win as senator or governor or the president, but it just doesn't quite happen. But it's been within single-digit numbers, and Texas is one state where women have been hit hard by the new laws passed since Dobbs. I mean, really hard. Women who didn't necessarily think about the issue before, some lives were put at risk. So, and then Florida, which of course is voter suppression central, so you have to take that into account. But the elections have been close. And going back to Ohio, Sherrod Brown is consistently ahead. He's of course won in that state every single time for the last 3 or 4 elections. I believe he was outspent hugely in 2012, still managed to won again in 2018, and is ahead in all of the polls by 5%, or at least. He's very popular there. He seems to be able to thread a needle where he's popular with people who may vote for Trump or may not vote for president at all. There are some of those, particularly in the unions. He's popular. But Rick Scott is facing tough election against, I'm forgetting how to even pronounce the name. Go ahead.
I think it's Mucarsel Powell.
There you go. And there have been credible polls of as low as 3%. And in Texas, Allred, who is a very good Democratic candidate for Texas, has been at least as close as 5 points against Ted Cruz. If there is a Dobbs effect, these could be nail biters. Is it credible to say that these states are in play? That's the question, Dave.
I mean, as recently as, again, 2 months ago, I don't think that would have been, a realistic assumption. The Dobbs effect is very real, as we saw in 2022, where, and even before that, like you said, where strong red states are having crossover appeal to defend reproductive rights. Florida has it on the ballot. There's about a half a dozen states that have it on the ballot now. Florida, I think they have passed a rule saying abortion is only legal for the first 6 weeks. Even Trump himself is out there saying that's too quick. Like, that's not realistic for people's lives. But then
he's going to vote for it anyway because he changed his position like 4 times last week.
Last week, right? Like at least twice, right? Like last week. So in a country in flux right now with at least 8 significant, presidential election events happening over the last, let's just say 8 weeks. It's, all bets are off with respect to whatever normal is. Even Nate Silver himself, the polling expert, he talked about when will we know if we were at a new normal period? But certainly with the debate coming up next week, it's not going to be between then and now. It's not going to be immediately after that because of the way these forecast models work. You need some time to pass for the people, for the voters to process the new information. But when it comes to, the core issue you're talking about, you actually mentioned to me, let's think about this from the perspective of both the presidential race and the Senate race. Because the balance of Senate is in play also. If we're talking about the potential for Rick Scott's 5-point lead to evaporate, or the potential for Cruz's 6-point lead to evaporate, or for that matter, look at it the other way. For whatever reason, if Sherrod Brown's 5-point lead doesn't hold up, if those types of leads can either be lost in the polling data itself, lost in the fact that more and more people are being mobilized than ever before. I think one of the things Trump said in a recent interview was, hey, how did so many people show up and vote? I think the number was 7 million people beyond expectation showed up to vote. And people have attributed that to, well, that's because it was Donald Trump running for a second term. And a lot of people are keeping their cards close to the vest because the politics, the public discourse around politics is so contentious And for that matter, it's contemptuous too. Like you have a hard time having a polite conversation with people about anything related to politics these days. So big picture, are these states in play? I mean, absolutely. The question is, how much of that might just be negated by the polling, the systematic polling problems that we've seen in the recent past too.
With Trump.
Yeah. So and literally, I saw a couple different polling experts who build polls and have been modifying their models. What they're saying is it's really hard to control for the fact that when somebody answers the phone and realizes that it's a pollster, that they just don't want to be bothered. They're like, I know what I'm going to do. I just, it's short version. It's really hard to get Trump supporters to participate in polls. And so they end up oversampling the population of people that they expect would be supporting Trump. Yeah. And then they're projecting upon them how they might vote and what's the intensity, how many of them live in any given area. So the models are theoretically out of calibration over the Trump era anyway. But I think we should look at it. I'll throw it back to you in a sec. But I think we should look at it from the perspective of also this big swing that occurred. Biden was seen as, for whatever reason, not a good candidate related to his mental and physical well-being over a projected 4-year period. Yeah, all signs indicated he would lose. Now there's a different candidate, and that candidate, now people are projecting that, like, now they can turn that around and say, well, what about Trump? Like, he's just as old, and maybe, and look at the vice president that he chose. He chose a sort of one of those red meat, MAGA types that's going to hit the ground running, and with hard hitting confrontational style. And maybe people are ready to turn the page. And so I think maybe that systematic polling problem can be compounded by the fact that people are just, across the board, just looking for something different and not really having an easy lane to express themselves. It could come out in the wash, like what you said, where this freedom issue, reproductive freedom, live and let live, equality for all, all genders and all lifestyles, like that's the modern norm. And it could be the case that's what ends up breaking the Florida polling, the Texas polling, and perhaps even beyond too, because like we talked about last week, a lot of these states are interconnected. If you lose Georgia, if you lose North Carolina, you'll probably lose Georgia. If you lose Arizona, you'll probably lose Nevada. If you lose Wisconsin and Michigan, you could lose Pennsylvania. So we could see huge swings.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go through a couple of the polls there. I mean, you go to 538 and they've got Scott versus McChrystal-Powell, 7% lead, 3% lead, 4% lead. But what should scare Scott even more than that because it really shouldn't be that close with the way Florida's gone recently, particularly with DeSantis, is that there are a lot of undecided voters in those polls, sometimes more than 10%. And then you look at the Florida president, Trump by 7% with active vote. Now that they don't allow for anybody who didn't vote, but Trump by 5%, according to the Telegraph. Florida Chamber of Commerce Commission poll, Trump by 7%. Clean and Prosperous America, Democrat, 4%, by 3%, 5%, and then again 8%. These are all single-digit ones, but again, they've got large numbers of people undecided. So the question here, and I can do some stuff similar in Texas. I mean, again, a lot of undecided. The question I have for you, Dave, and that we want to look into is it worth the Democrats making visits to these states? Now, for instance, I would argue that they might as well go to Ohio, because if you're going to the Rust Belt, it gets coverage anyways. It shows that. So they might as well do that. But should they bother with Texas and Florida? I mean, there's a very limited time left. And so maybe you want to just focus on those 7 states. But I don't know, maybe a little bit. And one of the things that is at play here is if they even just put a little bit of resources in there and it moves the needle just a little bit, Trump's got to spend money in there. He can't afford to lose these states. He loses one of these states and it's over. He loses Texas, it's over. He loses Florida, it's over. He loses Ohio, it's over. Because there's no way he's going to lose Ohio and win Pennsylvania, right? I mean, it's just that, as you say, they're kind of tied to each other. I mean, so these polls are good news for the Democrats in any case. And if they pull an upset in even one of those states, it's done presidentially, and it guarantees the Senate. Now, Brown is not the underdog. He's ahead. He's probably going to win that. I've already predicted him as winning. It's the question here, and I'll let you kind of close it out. Is it worth the Democrats' time to spend a little bit of time in here, and how much, and what kind of resources do they want to buy any ad time in those places, even just to force, because Trump would have to spend more. If you're defending something like that, he can't afford to lose it. And so he can't take any chances. He's going to have to dedicate some resources, or his dark money people will have to. But he probably has to go there too. So what do you think?
So there's two quick things. One is that Trump's team is already spending over $100 million combined in just Georgia and Pennsylvania. So they know the importance of
those states, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, like, making sure that they contest every place, everywhere. That I know these are battleground states, but they're being outspent 10-1 elsewhere in many ways. So the question is, what's the best force multiplier for Harris? You're saying to take some of these red states, and they're already in Florida right now. I mean, this past week, so they're taking it to Trump, kind of an in-your-face kind of move. I think that the idea that they have Walz as their candidate, who is like a meat and potatoes kitchen table guy, that they have a messenger, an effective voice, and specifically going into Texas might be a stretch, but you gotta take show good faith for the Senate seat there, maybe, but minimally, right? Like they I think they're going to stay focused. I think they're going to stay as focused as they can, eye on the prize, but that will include Rust Belt. They need young people. They need people of color. They need, to make sure that they're actually going into these suburban areas that are adjacent to these major cities that they've already got locked up, and that can include any and all of the above.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
So this week, in looking at the balance of power in the Senate and looking at the amounts of resources that are going into these campaigns, it's clear that Harris' team thinks that they have the Trump team on the back foot when it comes to states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona. I think they're going to spend a lot more time and resources in places like Atlanta and Phoenix, so that they could get to what I alluded to in the last segment, get to these suburban ring areas around these cities and make headway. And because they're going to be participating in these media markets, and because they're going to be on the ground making their case, that's going to have a knock-on effect where it's very likely that we see the Harris team end up taking the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt. I think that it's one of those, we'll see how it plays out. If they can stay gaffe free, making, no insert foot in mouth, and they could stay on message. I think we're going to see these trends continue to the point where it's, when you and I talk about the balance of power in the House of Representatives, we will probably be referencing the progress that's made from the Harris team in across the board in these battleground states. Right now, it's still Trump's game to lose, but I think that dynamic is going to be changing within 4 to 6 weeks. We'll see a balance shift pretty heavily.
Well, I mean, Harris is calling herself the underdog, but I don't think at this point she can be regarded as the underdog, given that she's at least slightly ahead in the polls, even if it's within the margins. But I do want to make a prediction about how this debate is going to go. One of the themes has been joy. Joy, as there's actually a great essay out there somewhere about joy as the antidote for authoritarianism. But I said in another show that she is that people are comparing her campaign to Obama's, the energy from it. But I think she's actually taking a playbook from Reagan, Morning in America, if you remember, how everything was upbeat and the Democrats were just negative Nellies or whatever you want to call them. She's going to take the approach in this debate. Probably not going to attack very much, at least not overtly. She'll probably parry with one-liners that have been prepared, just like she did in the debate. But I think her strategy is going to be to present herself as the statesperson and the grown-up in the room. And I think she's going to stay very much focused. I think that's possibly why she decided to go ahead and relent to the muted microphones. I think she wants to focus on presenting herself as somebody who can be trusted and voted for. And so I don't expect her to attack very much, except in some funny ways or all that. But I think she's going to focus on her campaign. If she does that and she stays on message, she probably won't look back. We'll find out if any of this stuff comes true. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.